So for those of you who do not know, my name's Nat, and I'm the head of community at an organization called Exceptional Individuals. We support neurodiverse individuals. The basic definition is any way which is a different way of processing information compared to the majority of the population. So naturally, we all think differently, but some people's way of thinking differently is substantially different to everyone else. And that's kind of what we're looking at today. Now, whether or not you see this as inherently a disability, disabling by society, I'll leave that up to you to decide. But there are reasons from a neuro-brain perspective on why we are the way we are. So hopefully we can go. And I am going to go under the assumption that you all know nothing today. And I'm going to do it as simple as I possibly can. So if you are already familiar, please excuse me. I am trying to simplify it as much as I can. So as I said, my name's Nat, and as well as being neurodivergent, I'm also currently doing a master's in neuroscience. So fingers crossed, you'll come to the right place and it will be at the level you're all expecting. So as mentioned, we support all the main neurodivergences. However, today we are going to be focusing on ADHD, and that stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactive Disorder. Here's a picture of our lovely team. And a quick 101 on us. We're a social enterprise, so we support people in our community for free, and we also work with corporates as well. We're a relatively young company, but we're cracking on now, 2015. Our unique selling point is that the vast majority of our team are neurodivergent, so experts via experience. And we also specialize in consultancy, recruitment, and employment. With all that stuff out of the way, it's also good to know, why do we do today? Well, we like to give back to the community and share knowledge. So we do these webinars every single week. And the last one we did was actually a general What is Neurodiversity 101. But before that, our kind of main series was Neurodiversity Inclusive Design. This was looking about how can we design spaces as well as materials and websites to really optimize things for neurodiverse individuals. So do check that out. Just go onto YouTube and type Exceptional Individuals and fingers crossed you find us. So a quick overview on what we're going to look at today. If successful, we're going to look at what is ADHD. We're going to look a bit of like the brain science behind it. We're going to touch upon medication and stimulants and how ADHD medication works. But a quick disclaimer, I'm not advocating nor not advocating for medication today. ADHD doesn't have to go hand in hand with medication, but I do find understanding about how the medication works for those who do choose to go down that route can really help you understand ADHD in a more general sense. So that's why we're going to be looking at meds today as well. So in a nutshell, ADHD, it stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactive Disorder. And that name was completely concreted in 2013. Before then, we had ADHD, we had ADD. It was a bit of a mess. But essentially, everyone now gets diagnosed with ADHD, even if you do not show the classic characteristics which a lot of us kind of attach to it. So there's three kind of subcategories. You can either be hyperactive. This means, you get really excited, you kind of struggle to concentrate. You could also have impulsive inattention. This also relates to kind of struggling to kind of focus on the tasks at hand, prioritizing. And lastly, combined inattentive and hyperactive. So most people who have ADHD tend to have the combined type. And those who do not have the combined type, who are just hyperactive, tend to be male, and those who do not have the combined inactive and hyperactive one, who are just impulsive and attentive, sorry, I know a lot of words here, tend to be female. That is important because when we think of ADHD, we think of some like really hyperactive kid kind of jacked up on Haribo, and that is not the case at all. A lot of people who have ADHD, 50% of them, most likely, who are female, tend not to show the hyperactive qualities. It's why that most people who you find are diagnosed tend to be male. And that's just because they align more to the stereotypical characteristics of what us as a society has attached to the word ADHD. Society sucks. And I think hopefully we're changing it. We're kind of learning more about it. But if you ever wondered, why is it so much easier to get diagnosed as a young white male? Well, historical context, not necessarily because you are not able to have ADHD if you are in any other the demographics. Hopefully that makes sense. So now for some science time. And again, I appreciate not everyone's going to be up to scratch with their science, so I'm going to break it down as much as I can. So if I do oversimplify things, if you are quite knowledgeable, please forgive me on this occasion. So a quick question, just to kind of see where all our knowledge is. On this, you just need to say if it's true or if it's false. So first question is, are there any structural differences in the ADHD brain? Yes or no? Second, people with ADHD have smaller brain volumes in 5 subcortical areas and also have smaller brains. And all of these have been backed up by references and science, so feel free to check them out if you are like not convinced. You know, we're still early days when it comes to the science, so there are a lot of mixed opinions. I've gone with the most higher reputation studies, but that doesn't mean they're not without their critics. So let's have a quick look on which ones are right. Yeah, they are actually all correct according to a 2018 study, which is the biggest study to date. So fact, brains who have ADHD are different. When we put them through big scans, they are different. And that's a fact. So ADHD is a real thing. We definitely know that. The next one is people with ADHD have smaller brain volumes. And this also says smaller brains in general. Yes, that is true. But before you start thinking, oh man, I have a small brain size doesn't correlate with intelligence, okay? And I'll say that again because it's really important. Brain size does not correlate with intelligence. Did you know Einstein actually had a smaller brain than average? So it proves it, but it's a fact. And part of the ADHD brain matures at a slower pace. And this is actually quite similar for all those neurodivergent conditions. We tend to be a bit slower at developing. I was approximately about 2 years behind my peers through all of my academic education. Really annoying. However, that difference does disappear in adulthood. So important to know why you might not notice the same differences in adulthood as you did in childhood. We tend to balance out as we go along. There is a little caveat to that though. Though the brain does eventually mature, it never matures to the exact same level as someone who doesn't have ADHD. Now, whether or not that is noticeable, who knows, but they have noticed that there still remains a key difference throughout your entire life. So here's some quick 101 facts that I can just bust out. So the ADHD brain is studied by image techniques. So maybe it's a MRI scan where you kind of go in a machine and they scan your brain. It could be a PET scan or an SPECT scan. Oh, can you share the name of the 2018 search on ADHD? Yes, I can. And I can send that to you later if you like, if you send me the email at the end. So the brain functions essentially are done by different scans. Why do you care about how we study the brain? Well, it's important to understand because when you think, okay, so you've told me that we know on a brain level, ADHD is distinct from those who do not have ADHD. Then why can't we diagnose people using these machines? Well, the simple answer is these kind of imaging scanning machines, they take a picture of the brain as it is in that current moment. But what they do not take into account is the brain in all your other elements of life. So ADHD affects you differently depending on different circumstances throughout your day. Unless you're continuously being scanned, you're not going to be able to get that kind of three-dimensional view of how your brain is reacting to certain scenarios. That's why currently you still have to do it the old manual way by having interviews, having a professional to kind of essentially study you. Okay, next thing, there is alterations in blood flow to brain areas. This indicates decreased brain activity. Not a great one for the ADHD team, I appreciate, but essentially the brain, it flows in a different way. And this would normally result in decreased brain activity. This isn't saying that is necessarily what's happening, but it is what it looks like for most. Then we've got the prefrontal area of the brain houses the executive functions. That means a lot, but all it means is the part of the brain which kind of takes the biggest blow when it comes to the reduced blood flow tends to be the part of the brain which is the kind of key go-to area for planning, organization, attention, and also emotional reactions. So when you think about it, yeah, there probably is a relation to why one deficit in one area connects to another one. But one of the most important things with science is to know that correlation doesn't equal causation. That means just because we can kind of make a link between something doesn't mean that's necessarily the reason. But it's not a bad place to start looking anyway. And lastly, ADHD may relate to dysfunctional brain connectivity. Children with ADHD don't have the same connections between frontal cortex / visual processing area. To break that down a bit further is when we say people with ADHD think differently, we're not just saying this, it's a fact. Our brains are wired differently. They do make connections. They speak a different language to neurotypical brains. So this isn't just a kind of expression we use to make ourselves feel better about ourselves. It is true. ADHD brains do process information differently. Okay, now we're going to do with a bit of chemistry. What is going on in that nut of ours? It's a lot. There's a lot. And to be honest, can I really explain neuroscience in an hour? Well, yes, I can, because I think as Einstein says, and I might be making this quote up, if you can't explain a complex subject in a few words, then you do not know the subject well enough at all. I think he said that, but who knows? So let's start off with the real basics. What is a neuron? Is it a particle? Is it a nerve cell? Or is it an element? Oh, nice, they're coming in sharp. It is a nerve cell. Now, you could argue it's a particle if we're getting on the really, really tiny level, but for this, nerve cell. And a nerve cell is just little things in your brain that sends communications, the little chatterbugs. You have nerve cells throughout your whole body, but the vast majority of them are in the brain. And these are just communication things. So let's say, I would like a cup of tea. Okay, I need to get my arm, need to move it. You know, every little connection is that. So if you ever get asked what is a neuron, neuron, nerve cell, neuron, tomato, tomato, they are the same thing. Here is one of these cute little neurons. They don't actually have smiley faces, but for today they do. They are messengers that transmit info around the brain. So here you've got little nucleus, then you've got the dendrites, which are these outer things. Then on here, you've got the axon terminal. We've got little synapses at the end. You don't need to know all of it, but you just need to know that these things are what helps us to communicate, well, makes us communicate. And they're also the things which can lead to certain challenges in those with ADHD. And as you can see, they're all connected here. They're all joined up and there's a lot of them. There are a lot of these little fellas all around our brain. So let's zoom in a little bit more. We've talked about the brain. We've talked about the neurons. Now we're going to be talking about the synapses. And the synapses are the tiny little bits at the end. So from when one neuron connects to the other neuron, actually, they don't actually connect. They're actually a tiny little gap between them. And that tiny little gap is called a synapse. So on this, what is one of them? Is it where info is passed from one neuron to a neuron, or is it specialized cells that detect stimuli? I've kind of already given the answer. It is the first one. So if you see this little image here, it's quite a good one. So this is, say, the end of the neuron, and the other one is the start of another neuron. And there's this like bit of blank kind of gap. And to communicate, they pump chemicals across to like, They just send like chemicals across and the other one sucks the chemicals up. And that is how communication is done. Okay, now we're looking at neurotransmitters. So remember, we talked about the brain. We talked about what the brain is made up of, neurons. We said the neurons have synapses, the end bits, and at the end of those synapses, we have neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters, neuro, remember brain, transmitters, sending messages, are just chemicals like dopamine. There's lots of different chemicals. And for this one, they're little white dots. So as you can see, we've got the white dots. And when the brain wants to send a message, it sends basically a bit of electricity through. And then the electricity stimulates these little chemicals, and the chemicals get pumped out and they attach to the other end of the next neuron. And that is easy stuff. That's how communication is done. I would like some tea, pump, pump, pump. The other one understands it, and it gets sent around the body. Now, neurotransmission is for the brain to do anything. Neurons have to pass information along. Think of it like a telephone line. So your brain wants to talk to your arm, ring, 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 and it will make the telephone. And that's all well and good. But what happens if that telephone line gets cut, or there's a dodgy signal, or one of the cables isn't plugged in properly? The message either isn't going to come across at all, or it's going to be distorted. It's not going to be as clear. It might be a bit delayed. So here's another example. Remember, this thing here is a neuron, which is the brain is made out of. The little things at the end is the synapses, and they pump out little chemicals called neurotransmitters. And that is your ABC of how the brain talks to itself. So at the moment, we're not really talking about ADHD. We're just talking about the brain. But again, to understand what ADHD really is, we need to understand how a typical functioning brain works before we can work out where there might be a bit of a deficit with those who have ADHD. So quick thing now, just to let me know, are we understanding this? Nope, kinda got it. It's completely fine if you do not, but it's just good for me to have a rough idea. Okay, so yeah, most of you have got it. Some of you kind of got it. And remember, this takes people years and years and years and years and years to learn. So if you do not understand it, I honestly don't blame you. But if you understand it enough that you can follow, perfect. And this is another good image. Look, the brain is just talking to the body. Now, a quick recap, how a neuron sends messages. So again, this is your neuron. And as you can see this little line here, that's essentially electricity being thrown along. And then when it gets to the end, the electricity kind of pushes those chemicals, those neurotransmitters across the synapse. So they kind of go into the abyss. Think of it like outer space. And they're kind of traveling across this kind of void until they hit the next neuron. So quick question to all of you. With ADHD, this process can get disrupted. How? So what could possibly go wrong with this process of one neuron talking to another neuron? We've got a neuron doesn't release enough neurotransmitters, or actually, I don't know where the other ones were now. Oh yeah, a neuron doesn't release enough neurotransmitters. And there was another one, but I can't remember it right now. Oh, here we are. Neurons suck the neurotransmitters back before a connection is made. So which one do you think is the main reason why ADHD occurs in human beings? It is, in fact, actually all of them. So when we look at ADHD, there's more than one way on why your brain might be acting the way it is. Let's break them down a little bit. Will you ever know which one your brain is? Maybe not. But the medication does know. And this is why some medication will work for you, but other medication will not work for you because it depends on a few of these different factors. So let's start off with this one. A neuron doesn't release enough neurotransmitters. So let's say your brain is saying you need to concentrate. So it's pumping out some of those chemicals, but it's not doing enough of them. And it's not enough chemicals for the brain to really register that you need to concentrate now. So difficulty. Then we've got neurotransmitters don't activate the receptors. So the chemicals, there's enough of them, they are pumping through, but the receptors are like, just, you know, when they're just like, we're not going to accept them. We're not really listening today. And the last way which ADHD can occur is neurons suck the neurotransmitters back before a connection is made. So when one is kind of like throwing the little chemicals out, before the receptors can kind of join to them, the like previous one just sucks them back up. They do this because it's basically recycling. You know, if I sent more chemicals that are needed, rather than waste them, I'm going to suck them back up so I can use them for next time. But rather than just having like a Henry Hoover, they have like a really super Dyson, which is just overly powerful and is kind of limiting the purpose that it's meant to be doing. I'll break these down in a bit more detail, but this is a good overview on why ADHD occurs. So quick fun one here. Has anyone ever been hung up on before? Yep, rude or no, no one ever hangs up on you. This is quite a good analogy for ADHD because it's like having a phone call, but someone hangs up the phone. So yeah, I'm not going to take this message today. Or it might be that you just have poor signal. Or it could be that the line's a bit dodgy. You know, the reason why a phone might go out could be a number of different things. Why the phone hung up is anyone's guess, but the resulting factor is poor communication. And that's kind of what ADHD boils down to. It's not being able to communicate in an effective way to people who do not have ADHD. All right, uptake. Whew, you know, this is very sciencey today. Remember how I used the word like sucking things up? Well, believe it or not, sucking things up isn't a very scientific term. The real term is called reuptake, and this is just hoovering stuff up. So neurons vacuum up extra neurotransmitters so they can get ready to send another signal. With ADHD, it can happen too quickly before the next neuron gets the message. All right, so let me try and explain this further. So remember, this thing is a neuron, this is the synapse, and when they want to send a message like, hey, you should communicate right now, it pumps out the chemicals. But when it like does too many, it will always kind of suck them back up to like kind of keep them for next time. But the sucker is too strong, so the other neuron doesn't get the same information. So you can see here they are, they're kind of, actually, here they are, let's see the little image here. Electricity comes, they pump them out, then they kind of get sucked up to the little receptors, like, okay, we've got the message, and then the things get like taken back up for next time, the ones that weren't used. But with ADHD, sometimes too many get sucked back up. So a quick recap, and there's going to be a lot of recaps today because I just want to really make sure that we're all on the same page. The brain is a communication network that relays messages from one neuron to the next. So yep, the brain uses neurons to chat. A synapse, it's the gap between neurons. Remember, they don't actually join, there's a tiny little gap. And the synapse needs to be filled with neurotransmitters, so chemicals to pass messages along. One neuron, another neuron, gap in the middle, chemicals. The neurotransmitters are chemical messages. Key neurotransmitters for ADHD, and this is a new one, is dopamine and noradrenaline. Those are the two key naughty chemicals which gets a lot of us into pickles. In ADHD, there is little dopamine / insufficient receptors. So the reason it could be that there just isn't enough chemicals, or it could be that the receptors which kind of, you know, listen to the chemicals and say, all right, I know what you want me to do, just aren't really working. They are like the two main reasons why most people will demonstrate ADHD tendencies. All right, we're on the home stretch. You're all doing really well so far. We're now going to have a quick look at medication. And just to kind of go over this again, this isn't because medication is for everyone, but again, it can really help you understand why ADHD is the way it is by understanding ways we might go to alleviate some of the negatives caused by the poor neurocommunication. So first of all, trouble passing messages can affect attention. I know it's this one seems pretty explanatory. Why do people with ADHD typically struggle with attention? Well, the brain just isn't sending the right messages across. It can impact motivation too. It helps explain symptoms like restlessness and impulsiveness. So sometimes you might be able to think, well, I am restless, I am impulsive, I sometimes lack motivations. Well, considering what I've just learned about how the brain talks to itself, this actually makes a lot of sense. Medication can reduce ADHD symptoms, helping pass along messages. So again, there's 3 ways which this typically works, and I'll go over it again just to make sure we're all following. So number 1, ADHD medication enhances the release of neurotransmitters. So remember I said how those chemicals are pumped out? Well, some medication kind of just like rockets it out. Imagine you have like a little water pistol and then you upgrade to like a super soaker. It's just more powerful. So it throws them out faster, which increases the likelihood that the receptors are going to actually get them. Another way that medication can work is to stimulate the receptors so they can catch more neurotransmitters. So imagine, rather than catching with your hand, you're catching with a massive baseball glove. It increases the likelihood that you're actually going to catch onto those chemicals. And the third way medication can work is slowing down the reuptake. So neurotransmitters have more time to reactivate the next neuron. Basically saying, stop sucking up those chemicals, ease up a little bit. I actually want to take some of them in. So those are 3 ways that medication can help. And this is why, for some people, if you try medication 1 and it's not working, it might be because your ADHD is primarily due to, say, number 3 rather than number 1. So different people will require different strategies in order to get the best outcome. I probably should have specified, though I am not a doctor today, so please do seek a professional should you want to inquire further. So we talked a bit about reuptake, the vacuuming, the little hoover that's attached to the end of our brain cells. ADHD medication releases more neurons, more neurotransmitters. So all this is doing is pumping out more chemicals. Others slow down reuptake. Those can help neurotransmitters reach the next neuron. So this image is a bit sciencey, but you can kind of get it. So this is a neuron, they're chucking the chemicals out, and you see how they're little triangles, the triangles will connect to the other little triangle holes. And when they get kind of taken back up, there's a protein which essentially slows it down. So rather than having like a big bucket, which they can just get sucked through, it's more of a tiny nozzle, and it just limits it a little bit. It's really clever. But this is one way how reuptake can be affected. Question back to all of you. Improving neurotransmission, remember the release of chemicals, ADHD medication can help. What would benefit you the most? So would it benefit you the most to be less hyperactive? Would it help you if you could pay attention more? Or would it benefit you the most if you struggle to retain new information? These are all common characteristics that those with ADHD may face, and depending on which one you select, maybe a different medication could support you in a different way. Okay, let's see which one all of you have picked. Ooh, pay attention. Nice. Yeah, no, I definitely resonate with that. And unfortunately, it's not as simple as to say, I struggle with attention, so you should take this medication. It doesn't work like that, but it can at least help you understand why it may not work. And again, medication isn't the only way. Sometimes just changing your diet, different exercise, different strategies can also help the brain pass those messages along. There's multiple ways of working with ADHD. It doesn't just have to be medication. So a quick true or false, ADHD medication works in about 8 to 10, is a cure, and reduces symptoms while in the body. So have a think. Which ones of these do you think are true about medication? Okay, I can see we've got a nice mix. Okay, so it works in about 8 in 10. That is correct. So not everyone who takes ADHD medication is going to be impacted by it. It's not a miracle drug. It doesn't help everyone. And that's why there's different things to try. There's also some that don't work at all. Other people might want a more holistic approach. Is a cure? No, there is no cure for ADHD. Only temporary things which can like subdue the what most would consider negative consequences. Oh, Amy says it helps manage. It doesn't cure. You're absolutely right, Amy. So the last one is correct. It reduces the symptoms while in the body. And this is a really big one. This is why people who take ADHD medication have to continuously take it, because it's only effective when it's in the body. Some medication will stay in the body like a few hours. Other medication will stay in the body a lot longer. It depends on what you take, and it also depends on which side effects you are most comfortable with. So now we're going to have a real quick look at medications. Again, not from the perspective of me educating you on which ones to take, but more on the side of if we know how they work, it can also inform how ADHD works in the first place. So a quick glance. First of all, there's two types of medication. You've got your stimulants and your non-stimulants. One of them is more proactive. It kind of, a stimulant gives chemicals like, okay, here you are, we need more chemicals, get the job done. The other one stops the chemicals, like, no, stop it, slow down, I don't want them. They improve the way the brain communicates, but only temporarily. However, everything comes with a consequence. They do have side effects. And this is why some people may choose one way of working with the ADHD and other people might choose another one. Because let's be honest, life's not so black and white. It's not like you have ADHD or you don't have ADHD. You kind of have, we all have other conditions going on. You know, some of us have OCD, others of us have like, I don't know, might have diabetes, you know, we have all different things. So you've got to take all of these into consideration in order to make an informed decision. So which one is best for ADHD, do you think? Do you think stimulants are typically best, or do you think non-stimulants? Remember, stimulants are kind of giving more and non-stimulants are blockers. Okay, nice, 50-50. Now, you'd think so. Most people, I can't remember if this stat is completely true, but I think it's around like 80% of people, if not more, will typically have a stimulant. They tend to be the go-to. But as Amy rightly says, it depends. It does. So it's very common for people to go between stimulant, non-stimulant, you know, back again, back and forth, like trying to find the right combination. Some people, for like, say they've got depression or they've got other factors, will not be able to have a stimulant because it might have negative consequences on other areas of the people's life. So yes, stimulants are typically the go-to, but not necessarily. One isn't better than the other. It depends on the individual, and it's not uncommon to kind of go between the both throughout your life. The brain is a complex thing, but it gives you an idea. So cheers, Pikachu. Next thing is knowing about rebound effects. So, you know, like I said, there is no miracle solution. Everything has a consequence. So some of the negative effects that the medication can result in include having a lower appetite, could be bad sleep, could be anxiety, restlessness, tics, you know, like what you might see in Tourette's. Some of these are going to be very, very small. Others are going to be more noticeable. And if they are very noticeable and affecting your life, that's when you might want to change it up a bit. You might want to change to a non-stimulant, or you might want to not have medication at all. And like I said, try more holistic approaches. So these things are normal, but it's not normal for them to impact your life negatively. You kind of have to make that decision with your GP and come up with a solution that works best for you. Have you heard of any of these drugs? Now, these are like the most common ones you're going to find on the market. Jokes, you've got to go to your GP for them. I can't pronounce these words, but you've got your Ritalin, your Bilesnir, your Direxor. I'll let you read them all. But these are the ones that most people would have heard of. Ritalin is a brand name. It isn't the actual name of the drug, but that's what most people know it as. And most people will have them. And you see the little plus, that means it's a stimulant, stimulant, stimulant. And the little minuses mean they're non-stimulants. So there's typically more options for the stimulants and non-stimulants. And most people are familiar with stimulants. It's just useful to know, because I used to always think with medication, why would this one be any different to the one I was having previously? Well, actually, they do very different jobs, but hopefully with similar outcomes if successful. Deborah says the benefits have to outweigh the side effects, and you're absolutely right there. That's a very personal question. So the winner of the most prescribed ADHD drug goes to, and I'm pretty certain I've already given this one away. Yay, yeah, Ritalin. And Ritalin is a bit controversial because in the US, there was a bit of a scandal where like they thought everyone was getting prescribed it, and it gave ADHD a bit of a negative rep. That's really unfortunate because it can be really helpful. But what this one does is it pumps more chemicals. I believe it's dopamine, but whatever it does pump more chemicals, and it kind of propels them out of the site from the synapses. So some key takeaways from what I've spoke about today is, first of all, not everyone needs medication. Do not think that ADHD equals medication for treatment. That is not true. Next one is work with your doctor to find the right medication. If you try something and it's not working, do not feel like despair. There are many different ways of finding a solution that works for you. Your doctor can help you manage any side effects. So do know that while side effects are normal, having them impact your life to a negative way isn't normal. So that can be supported. And we also know that medication doesn't cure ADHD. It just helps you live with it. And for some people, it affects it very substantially. For other people, it's more of a subtle way it affects you. And it doesn't always affect us continuously to the same level. Sometimes in life, it can have a really strong effect. Other times, more minor. So like, let's say you're really stressed, the symptoms of ADHD might be more apparent. Why? Because in certain situations, our brain creates more chemicals, or it might create less chemicals, exacerbating the primary reason why ADHD affects us in the first place. Ooh, all right, that was a lot of science today. I'm going to round up today with, all right, Nat, brilliant. What do I do now? So let's say I've said something these today and you're like, you know what? I actually think I do have ADHD. As some of you said, you're pretty certain you have ADHD, but you're not diagnosed. First of all, I'd say being diagnosed is expensive. Go to your GP as your first bet. Second bet, you might want to go for a private assessment. But before you do the second one, I would ask yourself, what do you hope to benefit from it? If you are an adult and if you're in the workplace and in the UK, there is support available. It's called a workplace needs assessment. And this is where you can get assessments. We look at your brain, how it works, support, equipment, and it's the next best thing. So get in touch with us. All you need to do is have a job, have an assessment, which is for free. We apply for the grant on your behalf, which is a government thing, and then we get you the training. It's not an official diagnosis, but it's a good alternative if you don't have the resources to kind of seek further support. But again, please do not think that a diagnosis is absolutely crucial. It's more about how it impacts your life. Holly says it's cost her £2,000 to get diagnosed and meds privately. That is a lot. And I'm really glad, Holly, you were able to do it. I know a lot of people might not be able to, or you might be really struggling with that amount as it is. I don't know. Amy says, right to choose can secure NHS funding quicker. Yep, ADHD, the NHS funding, hit and miss. Oh, great, Holly's in debt. I'm sorry to hear that. You're not alone. That doesn't make it any easier for you, but it's just, it's tough out there. Anyway, we've got a few minutes spare, so I'm going to open up to questions and I'll do my best to answer them. And if not, I'll try and find out the information for you.
Hello.
Oh, yes, go for it, Amy.
I used to do biology, so like the kind of biology of the brain was all coming back to me. But what it made me think was there must be like millions and trillions of synapses in your brain. So if the synapse is like, the message isn't getting through, like, because it will know, will it know if the message is not getting through? Will it try and trigger again? And does it only happen in certain bits of the brain, that kind of, the message is not going through? Or is it like throughout the entire brain that disruption to message is happening?
Oh, it's a good question. So it's only in certain parts of the brain, and the neurotransmitters, the chemicals, they are only found in certain parts of the brain. So while you might have like dopamine being quite a common one, there'll be like little subcategories. And with the medication, though when you take medication, your body doesn't know any better, so it will be in your entire body, but it only attaches to the part of the brain which is intended for. So try and think of it like the chemical which you put in your body is like a triangle, and the receptor in your body is like an inverted triangle, and that will only fit that part of the brain. So yes, that chemical is flowing through all of you, but it doesn't have any negative side effects on the whole. So yeah, it's very, very targeted. Sorry, I explained that poorly, but hopefully you got the gist.
I've got a question. It's my understanding that like ADHD is kind of developed in childhood, or like when your brain's developing, and then persists like throughout your life. But is it possible to grow out of ADHD, or like for your brain to kind of develop to the point that it wouldn't be considered neurodivergent over the course of your lifetime? Or does that not really happen?
Complex question. The answer is yes and no. You can outgrow ADHD to the point where you wouldn't consider yourself neurodivergent, just because the way it affects you isn't as apparent or noticeable. But more often than not, it is a lifelong condition. But the reason why it might affect you less isn't necessarily because the chemical imbalance has sorted itself out. It's more because you have learned coping mechanisms and strategies. So you learn to mask it. That, like, both answers are correct, but more likely than not, it's going to be something you have throughout your life. And remember that I said earlier that it can affect you differently depending on different stress levels or other factors. So maybe you're having a pretty chilled time in your life right now, but then maybe you move house, you get a new job, something happens, then you can find that something which has seemingly been quite dormant kind of reemerges. So yeah, it's a bit of a mixed answer.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Holly says, I heard that medication becomes less effective over time, like the body becomes accustomed to it. Is that true? And if so, what can I do about it? Holly, that is true. Your body does get accustomed to it. And that's why they might change the medication and mix it up. So remember how I said how you might go back and forth between a stimulant and a non-stimulant? It's quite common. So that is one thing you can do. I realize I have had ADHD after pregnancy and children and hormones impacted by traits. Yep, that can happen, very common. And also ADHD is hereditary, so it does run in the family as well. So heads up to that. If your children are diagnosed with ADHD, even though you may not be able to get a diagnosis, you could take a educated guess and assuming that the possibility that you may too have it is significantly higher than those who do not have children who have ADHD.
I concur.
All right.
Can I just ask, Nick, do you have any sort of recommended website for sort of lifestyle that helps ADHD? Because there's so much information out there.
Well, naturally, I would say go to our website, exceptionalindividuals.com. But apart from that, there's a really good YouTuber. I think it's just called ADHD Brain. And it's a woman who hosts it, and she's really good. And I watch a lot of her videos. I'll be able to find it if I have got the name wrong, but I think it's just called ADHD Brain, but I'll have a look. Okay. There are like foundations and like organizations, but their advice is maybe a bit more general, to be honest. But what I would say is any advice you get online, try and back it up with other advice. The internet is a crazy place, so you want to be able to find the most accurate information as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Just to finish up with, just so you know, we do these webinars every single week. The next one we're going to be doing is about what is an IQ test. And we're going to be looking at about how intelligence is measured and how it is biased against neurodivergent people. So if any of you have ever tried to get a job and they had like a psychometric test and you thought this is discriminating against me, you're probably not wrong. So we're going to be looking at like, how do we actually measure intelligence? We spoke about today about people with ADHD technically having a smaller brain. Well, maybe that's true, but it doesn't mean that intelligence is impacted. And we'll be looking at the reasons why that is. So do check it out. You can kind of click the little link or just go on our Eventbrite or website. And if you are interested in learning more, do check out our YouTube channel. We have videos that we recorded and we edited them to make them as fast-paced and interesting as we can. Okay, nice. And we also have an online neurodiversity test. So we have tests for ADHD. Big note here, these are not scientific. We use them to give you an indication whether or not you have ADHD and use it as a starting point to have a conversation with your GP or a professional. This doesn't, if you get scored as highly likely to have ADHD, it doesn't mean that you do have ADHD, but it means that it might be worth to further that discussion. But it's not a bad place to start. And here's our email and contact details if you want to get in contact, find out more. But I really hope you found that useful. It's been a bit of a long one, but I hope you found that useful. And again, if you want to go back to it, check out the upload, which we'll do in a few days' time, and you can kind of see there.
Thanks so much. It was really interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, really enjoyed that.
Cool.
And
Thanks,
brilliant
everyone.
PowerPoint as well. Very interesting, very ADHD sort of friendly.
I try.
PowerPoint. Thank you.
No, my pleasure, everyone. Really appreciate it. All right, nice. I'm going to email you just after this, Bengu. And thanks, everyone. Stay in touch and hopefully see you in future ones.
Well done.
Lovely.